And this is significant because this is the first time in the history of our poll that former President Trump beats President Biden.
2019, 2020, when Trump was president, he trailed all of them. This year, he's trailed all of them in our poll. First time in more than a dozen polls we've seen a result like this. Some of the other ingredients that go into that, we have 46% for Trump, 42% for Biden among the youngest voters. The youngest voters in the 2020 election were Biden plus 26. This could be a massive sea change.
Is Donald Trump destined to win in 2024? Well, listen to this take, folks. The 2024 election may have echoes of 1968, where a Republican, obviously Richard Nixon, won that year. We have a Democrat incumbent under pressure, a third-party candidate seeming to help the GOP. And get this, for added historical irony, you cannot make this up, the Democratic National Convention is once again being held in Chicago like it was in 1968. I would also add on top of that we have a Republican candidate, much like Nixon, that being Trump, who is running a comeback campaign, right? They were unsuccessful in the last election. They're now running to redeem themselves. And on top of that, maybe the events here are out of order, but I think the theme still rings true. Much like Richard Nixon, Donald Trump has made a lot of enemies within the deep state, within the political system, and they are now trying to weaponize the intelligence agencies and the justice system to go after him. Sound very familiar? Folks, today I want to dissect this entire take because there is growing evidence, at least when you look at the polls, that actually Donald Trump is in a favorable position to beat Joe Biden in 2024, which may sound counterintuitive because when you look at recent election results, 2022, 2023 have not gone well for Republicans. And so historically, that trend suggests that 2024 also will not go well for Republicans. But like I said, at least when you look at some of these polls, the story seems to be the exact opposite. And we're actually going to talk about the news today that Donald Trump seems to be very significantly leading Joe Biden, not just in one outlier poll there, but actually the majority of national polls that are currently being taken. And I want to dissect that and talk about that because don't get me wrong. While this is good news, and obviously in a time where we don't have a lot of good news, this gives us some hope. I'm also not here to sell anyone a kind of false hope, right? Because sure, Donald Trump may be up in the polls now, but first and foremost, who's to say that polls are actually reliable? They were not reliable in 2016 or 2020 to a large degree. So it would be hypocritical of me to suddenly turn around and say they're 100% reliable now too. I do think there's a story that polls tell, but we also need to keep in mind they can be wildly inaccurate. I'm not saying they should be totally ignored, but I also don't think they should be totally taken seriously. That's number one. Number two, and I think the more important point here, arguably, is that even if Donald Trump is leading Joe Biden right now, there is a lot that can happen between now and the 2024 election. Obviously, you know about the cases against Donald Trump and, who knows what happens with that and how that affects the election. But then on top of that, as we've seen many times before, a lot can just happen in election year. Right? Crazy things do seem to happen. And then obviously we kind of know what happened in 2020 after Election Day. And so I understand all of this. And like I said, I have said for years, actually, that 2024 is not going to be an easy election. It's not something that people should take lightly. And I'm not here to totally flip the script on that now. However, I do think, like I said, it is worth noting that Donald Trump is not only currently leading Joe Biden in the majority of these major polls, and I will prove to you in a second it is the majority, but also that polls that historically, in terms of sample size and all that stuff, have been unfavorable to Trump actually now show Trump leading. And one example of that is the NBC News poll, which, according to them, Donald Trump has never had a lead in. And listen to this here. This is MSNBC kind of discovering and finding out that for the first time in this NBC News poll, in the general election with the popular vote, Donald Trump actually now has a lead on Joe Biden. Take a listen to this right here.
Here it is.
Wow.
Donald Trump, we have at 46%, Biden, 44.
And this is significant because this is the first time in the history of our poll that former President Trump beats President Biden, still within the margin of error, but still significant.
Yeah, it's 20.
Still significant. And then keep this in mind, right? Even if it is within the margin of error, you need to understand also how the Electoral College works. If Donald Trump narrowly loses the popular vote, as you saw in 2016, as long as you don't get decimated in the popular vote, it's very likely that the Republican still wins the Electoral College. And so if he wins the popular vote outright, it's almost impossible that you lose the Electoral College as a Republican, right? When you know how the population breaks down and all that stuff. But even if the real number, let's say, is like Biden and Trump are tied at around 45, maybe Biden has a slight lead, that means Trump wins the election. Okay. So like I said, it's polls, keep that in mind. Don't take them verbatim in terms of what's going to happen. But that it is significant. It is worth talking about at least.
2019, 2020, when Trump was president, he trailed all of them. This year, he's trailed all of them in our poll. First time in more than a dozen polls, we've seen a result like this. Some of the other ingredients that go into that, Biden has long had an advantage over Trump on likability. Look, at the start of this year, 39% said they had a positive view of Biden, barely 30% of Trump. We've seen consistently a gap like this. Now, the gap is gone. 36 positive on both, and actually Biden 1 point more negative than Trump. That's been a significant advantage for Biden. Our poll says that advantage, at least for now, may be gone. And we talk.
By the way, that to me is believable, right? Because sometimes polls are like, what the heck are we looking at here? But that does make sense. It has to make sense to you because obviously, as the Biden presidency continues to stumble and fail, and also he kind of makes a fool out of himself, obviously that's going to hurt his likability rating. And then on top of that, in 2020, forget what you think for a second about what actually happened, in those situations. There is truth to the idea. A lot of Americans just didn't like Donald Trump in terms of personality. He was the incumbent. And so everything that happened in 2020, some people blamed on him. Joe Biden does not have that out anymore, right? Now the election is about him and what he's done as president. And so you can see that shift definitely happening. And then, by the way, on top of that, most of Joe Biden's 2020 pitch was, yeah, I may be a bumbling, incompetent fool, but at least I don't tweet mean things like Donald Trump, right? But now that if it's true that the likability of Biden and Trump are basically the same, I think a lot more Americans accept, Donald Trump, his personality, I might not like it, but things were better in the country, right? So it all kind of adds up to show you these numbers are not favorable for Biden at all. And then take a look at this. This is very interesting. And honestly, I don't even know how accurate this is, but like I said, even if the margin of error is a couple of points, check this out. Voters 18 through 34, as you see here on your screen, Donald Trump leads Joe Biden. Among young voters, at least according to this poll, 46 to 42. Now, again, do I 100% believe those results? No, I do not. But like I said, I think even if polls can be inaccurate, they sometimes show a snapshot of reality, even if the numbers are wrong. What this does show at the very least is that Biden is very much underperforming with the young voters. And young voters are just one of those demographic groups generally that are a lock for the Democrats. We need high turnout in our favor among young voters, obviously 18 to 34. If Biden is not significantly blowing out Trump in terms of young voters, then that means a lot. I'll say it means something. Honestly, I think it means a whole lot there. So
talked about younger voters on foreign policy, and it's true on a host of other topics. Disaffected with Joe Biden. We have 46% for Trump, 42% for Biden among the youngest voters. The youngest voters in the 2020 election were Biden plus 26.
There you go. I mean, take a look at that, right? And again, this poll could be wildly inaccurate, and still, if it's, say, 15 points off, that's still a pretty big drop off for Joe Biden. So something to keep in mind there.
This could be a massive sea change. And if you take a look here, too, everybody sort of says, hey, I'm not too nuts about the possibility of this matchup. So we said, let's measure this one way. And here's how we did it. Biden against an unnamed Republican. This is just a referendum on Biden, basically. And look at this. He goes from being in a dogfight with Trump to being double digits behind, but then flip it around. Trump against an unnamed Democrat, Trump goes from leading against Biden to being down by 6 points against the Democrat.
Just a fascinating look at the state.
So there you have it, folks. I mean, and by the way, I think this right here can be a little misleading because it's like, oh, generic Republican, generic Democrat. Okay, but who actually is the candidate? You know, you didn't put Newsom up there. You didn't put DeSantis up there. But, you know, honestly, whatever. Point being, the overall point here being that, again, like I said, these polls are showing you something. And how much should they mean? How much should you make of it? Like I said, be a little bit cautious. But I do want to point this out because both sides often fall into this trap of, oh, one poll says our side is leading and the other poll says this side is leading, right? So it's important, obviously, to look at the broad theme here. And so I think for that, we consult the RCP average. If you don't know what the RCP average is, that's basically the aggregate of all of the mainstream major pollsters out there, right? They take all the major polls, kind of put them into one average and then say, like, what does it look like here? And the RCP average has Donald Trump leading Joe Biden by 1.6 points in the general election in terms of national polls. And again, folks, like I said, if you're leading by this much as a Republican, you're probably in a pretty good position in terms of the popular vote to win the Electoral College, right? So again, I'm not saying that, oh, well, you know, we can just pack it in now. Like I said, a lot's going to happen in 2024. A lot of boots on the ground, you know, hard work's going to have to be done on the front end. And well, let's just stick to the front end for now, right? In terms of making sure this actually happens. Turnout's going to be big. All these things are going to be big. Like I said, we don't know how, if they do convict Trump in one of these bogus cases, we don't know how that's going to affect the election and what else can happen next year. But I just, again, want to show you where the race is right now. And as the great Twitter account President Blumph points out here, you may say, okay, national polls are one thing. What are swing state polls saying? Well, he points out this here. You know, you look at Georgia, for instance, key swing state, obviously. Well, Herschel Walker, who obviously lost in 2022, he was always either down by 2 to 3 or up by 1 to 2 in the polls, never led by about 6 to 8% in the Georgia polls. And apparently that's now what Georgia polls show Donald Trump winning by, right? Is not Herschel Walker numbers in terms of the polls. It's more like, as he points out here, Brian Kemp numbers, right? Right now in the polls, Trump leads by 5 to 7, including the poll that predicted Warnock +3. Long story short, to keep all the math out of your face here, both in the national polls, which you could argue are not that accurate, but also in a lot of the polls in the swing states here, the theme remains true. Trump is leading Biden in the polls. And that's pretty undeniable, right? You cannot dispute that. That is literally what is happening. So, you know, again, like I said, that should not be taken as, all right, we're going to win. I'm not saying that at all. Okay, I'm just showing you a data point to say, here's some grounds for optimism that hopefully you can build on, obviously, right? And of course, the counterpoint that I know some people will make is, oh, maybe this is even intentional, right? On their part, is they want Biden to, they want a reason or an excuse to push Biden out of the race, maybe run someone like a Gavin Newsom. And this current thing they're pushing, oh, Biden can't win in 2024, is kind of just a part of that greater psyop. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily true, right? I've not been as sold on this idea that Democrats are 100% going to run someone other than Biden as maybe a lot of other conservatives are. Big reason I kind of see for that is, well, you know, it on the surface makes sense if Biden is not the candidate, that Gavin Newsom would be the candidate. But at the same time, I think some Democrats and their consultants would look to, okay, at least Biden, quote unquote, won once. We have a track record there. Newsom is an unknown and it'll erase incumbent advantage. But then also on top of that, and I think this is another thing people forget, nominating Gavin Newsom, if Biden steps down, drops out, something happens, I don't know, actually may tear the Democrat Party apart, at least in some regards, because you think about it, the logical successor to Joe Biden is not Gavin Newsom. It's actually Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is his vice president. Now, Kamala Harris is very unlikable and unpopular, but in the scenario where that happens and they put up Gavin Newsom, white guy who's actually not second in line to take the spot in. They put him first in line, and that goes over Kamala Harris, obviously, quote unquote, woman of color and the person who actually deserved it. I'm just saying, I don't know. I'm a little bit more skeptical as to whether Democrats will actually go through with that idea. Okay. But you can think of that what you want. Like I said, there are reasons to be skeptical of this news, but I think we also can't be entirely doom and gloom, and I don't think it's a healthy mindset to be doom and gloom about next year either. Oh, it's destined to be a repeat of 2020. Well, in some ways, I understand, the reasons people would say that. And I understand that the last two election cycles, 2022, 2023, not the best signs for optimism. But you also want to have an attitude, a positive attitude that we're going to work hard and we're going to try to win. Okay. And I think that's the point I would at least like to make in this video here today. But with that said, folks, let me know what you actually think of this news, right? Because, I think some people will see it in very different ways. Some people will say, this is good news, we're going to win. Other people's going to say, no, this is an inside job. It's a psyop. They know Trump's going to lose, so they're going to nominate him. Or, this is all just to get Biden out as a nominee. Like I said, let me know what you guys actually think of that in the comment section down below. But before you go, be sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe if you are new. And until next time, everyone have a happy Thanksgiving. God bless, Alpha Moves Only, and peace.